Well, Josh here. Sorry for being a little late on posting a video this week. Back to school has hindered me somewhat. I cannot believe that I have a 1,200-page textbook for post-colonial and transnational literatures. At any rate, this is my review of Project Itoh's, is actually a pseudonym obviously, book Harmony, and this is really his only other novel other than the novelization of Metal Gear Solid 4, which isn't even available in North America. And you know what, that's really sad because this is a fantastic book. This is a really fantastic translation as well, I need to mention, but I'll go into that a little bit later. To start, to really to skim the surface of this story, because there is a lot going on here. This book is largely about a dystopian or utopian future, depending on how you look at it, future that is run by administrations, as they call them, which is basically given the populace this whole new world philosophy where health is kind of the utmost thing that you can achieve. It's taken the place of religion, it's taken the place of government, it's taken the place of virtually everything. Even jobs cater to this healthy lifestyle. But it's to the point of uniformity in every single person. And of course, this is what makes it somewhat of a dystopian future where things are not quite as perfect as they seem. And the story follows around and mainly the life of this one character, Tuan Kiri, who has living through this and lives through this one major event that happens later on in the novel, because she is kind of connected with the person behind, the progenitor behind this huge event. And I realize that's a really vague description, but I don't want to go into too much detail because, frankly, this book is really hard to summarize, and there's a lot that's interesting to discover. To start, I think the story itself does a really great job of pulling you in. This is very much a slow burn novel. It does not start with a bang, and it really doesn't get going until almost 80 pages in. For a book that is less than 300 pages, this is, you would think this was detrimental, but the fact that the world that this novel creates is so interesting really draws you into it. There's a lot of different acronyms and things that they introduce you to. The world philosophy is vastly different from our own, and adding to that the kind of the culture shock differential between North American society, of which I'm used to, and Japanese society, it changes things considerably again. Now, don't feel threatened by that, though. Like I said, this book is less than 300 pages. It's a slower read. We'll get to that in a second, but it really is worth reading. There's a lot of great issues in this. This is very much a thinking man's book. My best thing I can relate to is if you like Ghost in the Shell, that kind of mix of slight but great action and deep thinking, this is very much for you. Particularly if you like social science fiction, this is definitely for you. And I guess to give an example of that, something like Isaac Asimov's Foundation, I suppose. To get to how it's written, though, I think is really important. This book is written in a format where it's part prose and part HTML. And that sounds bizarre, but the code portions really work. I'm definitely a fan of books that are written how should I put this? Just different formats rather than just straight prose paragraph, third-person narration or third-person style. I like first-person narration a lot, and this is definitely third-person, but it has an over-expanding scope where the the dialogue will be interrupted every once in a while by kind of a code listing, and oftentimes this will be listing characters' inner thoughts, listing specific options that this character is considering, maybe their feelings at the time, sometimes describing how they're reacting to things in the moment. It's really interesting. It kind of creates a literary soliloquy where you get insights into things without really getting insights into things. It's kind of as if the author himself is telling you these things. It really breaks the fourth wall quite a few times as well, particularly when it starts referencing sometimes how the reader may be feeling, which is really bizarre to read sometimes. But once you get used to it, and as this does really sound really frustrating to you, don't feel like it is, because once you get used to it after the first couple pages, it's really intuitive. It really helps move the story along. It really doesn't slow down the pace as much as you'd think it would be. Particularly the first couple pages kind of overload on it just to give you a feel for it, but after that it definitely calms down into a more relaxed combination of prose and this weird kind of new age, and I use new age not in philosophical religious terms, but just modern, I guess is a better word, modern poetry. And it's really neat to actually look at. It adds some depth to the novel that you might not think was otherwise there, although this novel does certainly have depth otherwise. And overall, like I said, I mentioned before, the translator really does need to be commended because I read a lot of translated novels that just don't translate very well. Particularly Hideaki Kikuchi's Vampire Hunter D series, I think really has an incredibly stiff and formal tone to it that sometimes work for the stories and sometimes really fail, particularly in the action scenes of that series. It was better in Wicked City, I had a great translator there, and this story is probably the best translated I've yet read. It does have a few spelling mistakes. That's the editor's fault. But the translator definitely does a great job of trying to giving you this interesting voice to listen to, and it's hard to describe without giving either too much away or going into too much detail. But suffice to say, the translation is really beautiful. The prose and just grammatical complexity of the story really shows through. It feels like it was written by an English person. There's definitely been a lot of work put into this. I really got to give Viz Media credit. And overall, I have no complaints whatsoever about how it's written or how the story goes in itself. Now, the one thing I do need to mention, though, is I just mentioned I didn't have any problems with the story, and I do have some problems with the story, and I do need to mention them. They mainly deal with the latter half of the novel. I won't spoil anything, though. Suffice to say that I thought the novel ended. I like the ending itself, but I thought the ending was the actual build up to the climax, and the climax itself was both very abrupt, and I don't necessarily like some of the things that it got into. It seemed like there was one backstory for the antagonist that it seemed a little far-fetched, suffice it to say. It's very much a theoretical philosophy, and I understand that it is transplanting that onto the character, and it worked for the purposes of the story, but I thought it seemed a little ridiculous, considering that the rest of the story is so concerned with creating this incredibly vivid, very detailed, and very interesting science fiction world that really could be reality. It creates what you would. It's definitely some great world building. It creates a world that you can see almost happening, and despite some obvious technological differences, it really seems real. This just kind of drew me out of the story a little. Otherwise, I have no complaints whatsoever. This book's fantastic. There's some really great thoughts in there. There's a good story. It can get bogged down in philosophical conversations at times, but those mainly happen towards the latter half of the novel. And honestly, there's some really complex ideas in here, and I do not see how they could have really simplified them without just giving you an essay to read, which some books do, and I fucking hate that. At any rate, I really advise you to pick up Project Itoh's Harmony. It's an obscure book. I literally just randomly picked it up off the shelf and read the first couple pages. I didn't really like it, to be perfectly honest, but I carried it around with me as I was looking at other books, and I kept looking back at it. Like, this style is interesting. I like where this is going. Don't read the back of the book because it spoils a whole hell of a lot. Just go on my synopsis if you can, if you give me enough credit, and just try it out for yourself. Try it out. Maybe read a couple pages, come back to it. I think it really grows on you. It's not something that immediately pops out at you. At least it didn't to me. But it's definitely worth picking up. There's some great stuff here. It's a well-written book and one that is very, very good, I think.